looking at this adorable face. You might think that the original Ford Bronco was a runaway success, but it kind of wasn't. Ford asked a bunch of people what they wanted in an off-roader and then gave them every single thing they asked for. But if the goal was to sell 1 million of these things, Ford asked the wrong people. The original Bronco was, for all intents and purposes, a very left-brain, rational thing that happened as the result of something very unusual in the early 1960s. Ford created a team led by Lee Iacocca that would go out and figure out what new models to make. And they did this by doing something that didn't occur to most car industry executives. They went out and asked actual people what they want. This was the same voodoo magic that resulted in the Mustang and its record-breaking sales numbers. Go figure. Ask them what they want, give them what they want. To come up with the Mustang, Ford had simply asked young people what they wanted in a sports car, and they said sex appeal. Shocker. For the Bronco, Ford's research honed in on people who drove 4x4s, the Toyota Land Cruiser and the Jeep CJ5, neither of which were cars as much as they were military-spec off-road vehicles that you could drive on the street. Barely. Forget about things like automatic climate control or massaging seats. The Jeep was as well equipped as a golf cart. It didn't even have dash vents. Windows fogged up? Get a towel. Then along came the International Harvester Scout, which was also basically a tractor with a license plate, but it was far more livable on the street than either the Jeep or the Toyota. You could almost have a conversation in it while driving on one of those new high-speed interstate highways, and it quickly became a bestseller. That reinforced Ford's research. The people who were buying these 4x4s were World War II veterans who chose them because of their ruggedness and off-road capability. But the vets were now in their 40s and were starting to go a little soft. They wanted creature comforts. Outlandish things like suspension that suspended, or fresh air ventilation, or radio. Or here's one, the ability to keep you dry when water falls out of the sky, because that is literally something a Jeep couldn't do. And you get all bent out of shape if your CarPlay is slow to respond in your Grand Cherokee. Wah. Oops, guess the camera guy has a Jeep. Anyway, since the segment-defining Jeep was open air, the Ford needed to be a convertible too. And so all 3 of the Bronco body styles had removable roofs. First was the Roadster, which had no doors and now makes us wonder how anyone survived the 1960s at all. The second Bronco had a half-cab removable roof to make it a pickup, though funny enough it was named the Sports Utility. And then there was the third model, which Ford called the Bronco Station Wagon. Ironically, this is the one we would call Sport Utility today. But this too was a convertible. This roof comes off, though it weighs about as much as I do, so good luck with that. All Broncos had fold-down windscreens too. I think you get the idea here. Bronco could be all things to all people. A convertible pickup family car that goes off-road. And more, you can order it with a post hole digger. One marketing guy from Ford even called it a new kind of sports car. I'll have whatever he was smoking. Look, you're witnessing the birth of the term sport utility vehicle. And more importantly, this was a sport utility vehicle that you could live with every day, even in your 40s. Very much unlike that segment-defining Jeep. First, it had Ford's new monobeam front suspension. The big deal here was that it dumped leaf springs in favor of coil springs. These gave a dramatically softer ride and a lot more stability. In fact, period road tests complained about how quickly the engine was turning at highway speeds. This is something no one cared about in a Jeep because the CJ was so miserable at highway speeds, who cared what the engine was doing? The other huge benefit was that the coil springs left lots of room for the wheels to pivot. In combination with a new hub design, the Bronco's front wheels could turn 37 degrees, compared with a typical 29, and that meant a turning circle 7 feet less than the Jeep's. That maneuverability helped it off-road. So too did the Bronco's size. This thing is tiny. Let me put it in perspective. This is the same length and width as today's Mini. And I'm not talking about the 4-door or the SUV, I'm talking about the little one, the 2-door, the Cooper, the miniest Mini that Mini makes. The creature comfort stopped way short of things like electric wipers, power steering, or an automatic. all Broncos had a 3-speed column-shifted manual. This one, like many, was converted to a floor shift. It's also a sport Bronco. This is not the same thing as today's Bronco Sport, which isn't a Bronco at all, but is instead a Ford Escape in drag. The Sport Bronco was just an appearance package with bright metal and chrome everywhere. But it was this badge that told everyone you were a leadfoot. The base Bronco had a 170 cubic inch straight 6 that was rated at 105 horsepower. But that was gross horsepower, which is just another way of saying BS. It made like 80 horsepower. Ford realized guys who like to go off-roading occasionally like to go up a hill, and so the Bronco got a V8. This was the corporate 289 cubic inch V8 rated at 200 horsepower, double the power of the 6, even though it made like 150. Whatever, that was enough to give the Bronco more horsepower than anything it competed against. And trust me, it needed it because this hood weighs about 1,000 pounds. The Bronco delivered on all the things that research said real-world 4x4 buyers wanted. And so, not surprisingly, the Bronco was a resounding success in that tiny little market. Turns out, Iacocca asked the wrong people. What he didn't know, and really no one knew, is that it wasn't just returning GI off-road diehard enthusiasts who wanted a 4x4. Everybody wanted an SUV. And to regular customers, creature comforts were far more important. So Ford eventually, and probably begrudgingly, added things like power steering, power brakes, and an automatic transmission. But there was one thing that Ford could never add to the first generation Bronco, and that was space. Chevrolet proved that when it launched its assault on the Bronco, the massive 1969 Blazer. It towered over the Bronco, and not just in size, but especially in sales. The Bronco didn't stand a chance against the big Blazer. And so after 12 years of selling the little Bronco, Ford came to the conclusion that, I quote, "It is obvious to us that a Blazer-like vehicle is the only way to go." Finally, in 1978, Ford replaced the little Bronco with a full-size pickup-based behemoth. The big Bronco was nearly 30 inches longer, almost a foot wider, and over 1,000 pounds heavier. And the big Bronco's sales jumped by 530-something%. That big Bronco lasted only 2 years before it was replaced by a marginally smaller one, but one that had finally switched to an independent front suspension, giving real on-road comfort. And then that thing lasted quite some time, through a couple of facelifts, after which it became the O.J. Simpson Bronco. After that, well, it was the end of the line for Bronco. For 25 years anyway, now there's a new Bronco, and history is repeating itself. Once again, the Bronco is a great-looking, simple, elegant piece of industrial design. Once again, it has removable doors and a removable roof, and class-leading horsepower. A look at the spec sheet shows that it poos all over today's Jeep Wrangler in almost every off-road metric. Ground clearance, breakover, water fording depth, departure angle, blah, 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 blah. This time, Ford knows better than to concentrate just on that. So, it'll be the little billygoat two-door Bronco that'll someday appear in videos like this. And it'll be the four-door that, like the Wrangler, causes it to fly out of dealerships today. By the way, the new four-door Bronco is the biggest Bronco ever. Ford knows that size always seems to win at the dealership, but out on the trail where our minds paint the fantasy of a go-anywhere, do-anything 4x4, it's the baby Broncos that we'll always remember. Okay, so you're just gonna keep the Ferrari framed out the entire time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Action.
I'm not some rich YouTuber asking you to like and subscribe. Hey, up, keep the Ferrari out. I'm an automotive journalist asking you to like and subscribe. And that's because that's how YouTube works. If you don't click those buttons, YouTube doesn't know you liked what you've just seen and isn't going to show you any more of it. And if you don't like what you've just seen, well, join the club. And by that, I mean the Hagerty Drivers Club, which gets you access to this award-winning magazine, as well as discounts on amazing stuff. And if you still don't like what you've seen, well, then just leave a nasty comment, because that's how the internet works. I need to go clean that up.